Assassin's Creed Mirage has now got gameplay courtesy of Ubisoft Forward, and I can't pretend that it looks genuinely terrible because that would just simply be a lie. Of course it doesn't. They simply showcased an Assassin game in an Assassin's Creed installment, so I guess props to Ubisoft for that, but I'm not in the market for providing kudos for the bare minimum. I said I'd pay attention to the gameplay in my last video on Assassin's Creed Mirage, so I thought I'd give my opinion today. I just want to throw a disclaimer out there that if you aren't fond of hearing people talk ill about your favourite franchise, maybe give this one a miss, because there are two mindsets battling in my head. One side is registering a genuine attempt to at least return Assassin's Creed to Assassin's Creed, and the other registers the cutting room floor of a Valhalla DLC. And this was what I was trying to convey, perhaps a little poorly, in my last video. I think sometimes I get caught up too much in the argument that Assassin's Creed just simply isn't Assassin's Creed anymore, that when something tries to actually be Assassin's Creed, at least on a surface level, it makes me realise the broader point that the biggest obstacle that Assassin's Creed has faced in recent years is actually just the quality of it. But I'll be the first to admit that based on my own arguments, I'm effectively moving the goalposts here. Now, while I don't think we've seen enough of Mirage to judge it on a quality basis, we have seen enough of the engine it's using that doesn't appear to have changed much to understand that it's really going to have to try to break my perception of that, so I feel justified in nitpicking a bit. So we've got a few bits to go through today: a video about how Assassin's Creed is supposedly returning to its roots. There's also a story trailer, which is always very nice, and I suppose it gives us an idea of the plot at the very least. And then there's a gameplay demonstration that in short shows us a story related cutscene, and then goes off and shows us what I presume is a side mission assassination contract that will give us loads of rewards, such as metal, wood, and whatever this is meant to be. And you know that I'm a sucker for resources in Assassin's Creed, but I suppose there's no context nor motivation for what's actually occurring in front of us. So I decided to withhold my opinion and wait for everything to be together before I started discussing anything at length, because as is usually the case with Ubisoft marketing campaigns, otherwise things just get messy. I think the best place to start then will be by discussing the actual gameplay demo, and then going on to discuss the context provided by the Return to Roots video and the story trailer. That way at least we're getting the big thing out the way first, where most of the actual gameplay juice is, so we'll start there, I suppose. So the gameplay demonstration begins with a little bit of light parkour, which is, as we know, integral to an Assassin's Creed experience. Being able to climb around on rooftops, and specifically in a parkour-friendly environment, is important. Being able to interact with that environment on the fly and then take to the rooftops to abscond, it's something that certainly drew me to the Assassin's Creed games. Though besides from some interacts and a more parkour-friendly environment, it appears as if the parkour for the most part is exactly the same as that of Valhalla, perhaps without the magnets that seem to draw you back towards the ground. So it appears the parkour system has improved in its environment more so than it has actually improved in its own flow, as it doesn't appear to be very player controlled, it just appears to be pointing forwards and moving. Assassin's Creed 1 through Revelations all pretty much ran on similar fundamentals, but where they differ is the ability for the player to insert themselves, because it's a challenge to get faster. It's not necessarily difficult to do, but it's a lot harder to master because for fluidity the parkour relies on timed cancellations and directional input, and though it wasn't the most aesthetically pleasant system going, it felt very well accomplished in the sense that you felt satisfied when you got the hang of it. I know many people would make a very similar argument for Assassin's Creed Unity especially, which has a much more flashy visual style but also has a fair chunk of player control that allows for total fluidity provided you actually take time to learn the system. And based on the little that is actually shown, it doesn't necessarily appear to be the case in Assassin's Creed Mirage, but that was as expected really. Does it really matter that much though? I mean, if you wanted to be 100% faithful to the old Assassin's Creed titles and maybe even Unity, then yeah, sure. But I mean, there are plenty of Assassin's Creed games that don't do this too, so Whilst I'd hardly say expressive player movement in the parkour system is integral to the brand, at the very least I feel it was an integral part of the gameplay of Assassin's Creed 1 through to Revelations. It was initially gutted to make way for a more animation-based system in 3 Black Flag and Rogue, but even then it was still used in 3 and Black Flag's multiplayer because it was the superior system for actually highlighting player skill. It's something I've observed to be a shame that it's gotten lost in the modernisation of the franchise. But that in itself is far from the end of the world. The next thing that happens is this cutscene in which the faces really take me out of any form of immersion. Not only are the faces stiff and the animations quite cheap and robotic, but the dialogue is delivered incredibly flat as well. I can certainly look past the faces being off because that's what was expected after Valhalla. Furthermore, many great games have visual setbacks, but facial animations is something that Assassin's Creed has struggled with for years now. There are still random animations for bodily expression that still don't make any sense, but then again, Valhalla engine, what did we expect? You just would have thought there would have been some commitment to improve that. Whilst it's stiff and jarring, that doesn't necessarily mean it won't be good. Like I said, many games do have these issues and yet still manage to triumph besides, but the demo hasn't anchored me to anything to draw me away from it just yet. The story trailer shows off some superior animation, which means that there will be some rendered cutscenes actually in the game that will look significantly better, but if anything, in my opinion, that's going to help pronounce the differences and make it even more jarring rather than actually contribute to any real quality. It just shows that the games could be capable of having better cutscenes and better animations from characters if they can be bothered. I don't mind if the odd cutscene in passing is obviously cheaper compared to the vast majority of the game, it's not really a big deal, but you only need to look at Ubisoft's previous titles to get an idea for where the majority is likely to go. I am open to being proven wrong, but as it stands with regards to my experience with recent Assassin's Creed titles, I feel as if that's a fair judgment. Then Basim unlocks a new tool and consults this board for a side quest, taking a very general assassination contract out of what appears to be several different archetypes of contracts. And then Basim embarks off to do killing. He deploys his controllable eagle to survey the environment, but it's immediately shot down by sentries. First of all, I understand this feature's intent. It's to remove the comfort of being able to survey an environment before you're in the thick of it. And that in itself is a very good thing. The bird is too convenient. But this is a nonsensical way to do it. Why are the guards just shooting down birds as a rule? Why is this a logically justified gameplay mechanic? Do the guards somehow know that this eagle is being controlled by an assassin, or are they just shooting the birds down for fun? I think to remove the convenience of this feature, I would have personally just removed the controllable bird mechanic altogether. It barely made any sense to begin with, but one character being able to telepathically control and see through the eyes of a bird, you can explain that away with a little bit of Assassin's Creed magic, but now they've used it so much that they actively need to impose limitations on it that make it make even less sense than it already didn't. The intent is sound, but I would have suggested removing the bird altogether, but that's just me. So instead, Basim's got to go the old-fashioned way and just climb in and hope for the best. He has regular eagle vision, so you'll see no complaints from me there. He then dives into a haystack and then hops out, startling the crowd watching him. However, he manages to calm them, which I think is actually pretty cool. Then he blends in with them, so social stealth is certainly back, and I can respect that as well. Not quite like in Valhalla, where you could only blend with specific crowds. In this, you can blend with random crowds, which means it may actually stand a chance of being useful. I know you could only blend with specific crowds in Assassin's Creed 1, but that was on the whole a more thoughtfully designed environment for social stealth, so it actually worked because they were placed with purpose and not randomly. Seeing that then be used in tandem with regular stealth mechanics like crouching and hiding in bushes and using sleep darts, nice. Basim passes a crate that is no doubt full of redundant resources and then assassinates a man, very nice, and then makes his way over to exact revenge on the sentry that shot at his bird. We see distractions get used to maintain stealth, and yeah, that's no doubt useful and to be expected, and then he kills a guy and is detected by another fella, so he quickly throws a knife at him and kills him too. All the while, the sentry doesn't notice that, despite the man shouting, because he's too busy looking for birds to shoot. He does seem to react to Basim before he gets a chance to assassinate him, which means that players will have to react quite quickly in situations like this to avoid detection, which means there's at least an element of keeping pace for the best outcome. But at least the bird's free to now survey the environment and make it far less grounded again. And now we know our target's in the big fancy building, and not gonna lie, that was probably gonna be the first place I would look. And this is where we get introduced to the next mechanic. Basim enters some focus mode and marks these 3 guards, and then we get introduced to fucking teleportation. I will probably argue it seems far more ridiculous than it actually is. The practical effect is you teleport and kill 3 guys in quick succession, and that is what's ludicrous about it. But as we know, Assassin's Creed is experienced through a modern day character, named or unnamed, reliving memories inside an animus. And those memories aren't perfect and at times are a little glitchy by design. But because usually this is a video game about a simulation, everything can be explained away with a word that my good pal James likes to throw around a fair bit, and that is diegetic. He's the only person who I've ever heard use this word, so I had to Google its definition. As a result of the simulation concept, everything that you can see is occurring within the context of the story. From the menus to the HUD to the glitches in the animus, all of that is actually being experienced by the modern day protagonist. And what this means for the teleportation is that Basim is entering a state of high focus where there's a lot of blanks to fill because all he's focused on is killing these guys rapidly. So logically it may not canonically be teleportation, but it may give the appearance of it when re-experienced in the animus. But I feel as if that needs to be addressed and contextualized and not just allowed to be filled in as a theory. Otherwise it may as well just be teleportation. I saw it as an attempt to do something genuinely cool in an Assassin's Creed game, so I kind of leave it at that. And then the demo ends with Basim assassinating this guy. There is no White Room confession because I'm led to believe, based on the fact that this was on a notice board at the start, this is just some piece of side content. And once that's done, in true assassin fashion, Basim absconds. There's a brief showcase of the combat where Basim parries and then stabs a guy, but that's kind of it. He then drops a red smoke bomb, disappears out of the complex, and then runs through some tight streets before vanishing into a crowd. On the one hand, in this demo I can genuinely appreciate what appears to be an actual attempt to bring assassins back to Assassin's Creed, but I also see a big battle to compromise on Valhalla's gameplay. The demo in itself was 7 minutes long and featured a piece of random side content. I think it would have been more impactful to see a story mission play out of some description, because you can show us how Assassin's Creed's mechanics come together to make an actual Assassin's Creed game as much as you want, but if that doesn't impact a story being told, what's the point? I feel as if that should be the big focus. And then of course there's the argument that I'm not about to praise Assassin's Creed Mirage for doing the bare minimum in providing an Assassin's Creed experience, something I do stand by. The counter-argument is, if we don't support this game, they won't make Assassin's Creeds anymore. Do you understand how ridiculous that is? If Ubisoft don't want to make Assassin's Creed games, then they're more than welcome to just not. I'm not going to praise a game for doing the bare minimum in hopes that they keep making games that do the bare minimum. Ubisoft should be convincing us that it's worth our money, not us convincing Ubisoft that this game has a right to exist. I understand the thought process and I can respect it. I think it's a bit ridiculous, but that's more so because of the situation itself being ridiculous. Ubisoft strayed from Assassin's Creed's brand identity, found their games hitting a larger audience as a result, and now for actual Assassin games to fall under the Assassin's Creed brand, it requires us to over-appreciate the things that should be a given. But the flip side to that argument is, of course, a publisher is going to gravitate towards publishing a game that's going to generate more income. It's just logic. But I suppose that brings us to the next question. If that's all it takes to push Assassin's Creed completely off its own brand, then what makes anyone convinced that Ubisoft is committed in any way to bringing Assassin's Creed back to form? That being said, I can appreciate and respect the individual developers working on the game who clearly do care about Assassin's Creed as a brand enough to at least try to make an Assassin's Creed game albeit with the limitations of Valhalla's gameplay. And if any of you are watching, not that I think that highly of myself, your efforts certainly haven't gone unnoticed. I just see a massive difference between the creative vision of the individuals working on the game and the resources they've actually been provided with to provide that. As this game is styled as homage to Assassin's Creed 1 specifically, a throwback to where the franchise started. And I think I understand and appreciate the idea perhaps more than the execution, at least from what we've seen. You see, in the Back to the Roots trailer thing, I don't know what you'd call it, there was one thing that rubbed me a little bit funny. Most of the information it provided has been reiterated by the gameplay demo, so it doesn't really need going over and over again. And that was the Assassin's Creed 1 filter, at least that's what they called it, to inspire some nostalgia. It's basically an Acre-styled Assassin's Creed 1 filter, but all it does is really wash out the colours. As I said on Twitter, I really do get the sentiment. It is a nice feature, but I kind of believe it misses the point. You can't just apply Assassin's Creed 1's colour scheme, albeit optionally, without reason and expect it to hold weight within itself. Because the colour scheme of Acre was just the icing on top of a deliberately crafted, oppressive and depressing atmosphere. One that doesn't necessarily represent the rest of the game either. It's just the lot on top of the atmosphere of that specific place. And whilst it's significant for Acre, that doesn't translate to significance for the broader story of Assassin's Creed 1, nor does it feel especially nostalgic in a colour grade applied to a game that is not it. At best it can be ignored, and at worst it's blatant nostalgia bait. And it wouldn't be as big an issue if the difference between the AC1 filter and the actual colour grading of the game were as different as they are, because the colours are just the icing on top of atmosphere. If you can change the colour grading in Assassin's Creed Mirage, what does that say about its atmosphere? That's not a big thing anyway, but the Return to Roots video is actually quite interesting, and I can understand why it would excite people. Had this been the game they made instead of Valhalla, I certainly would have been frothing over it, because for me that was the straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't an especially terrible game in my opinion. I quite appreciated it on many levels. It was just the game where I most felt that my desires for Assassin's Creed were never going to be met. I was always a difficult guy to please, and another reason why I am this way with Mirage is because of a detail listed in the story trailer. I've said before that whatever happens in Basim's little story here, it has to culminate with him embracing the fact that he's effectively a sage of Loki, a Norse god, and then he's going to go and fight alongside Vikings for a bit before eventually fighting said Vikings, getting attached to an Isu crane and preserved into the modern day, where he then goes to an airport gift shop and purchases a wolf t-shirt. And we know that a big point of the plot is Basim keeps having visions that he doesn't quite understand, and we know that's probably related to the madness that is his later life. And I suppose on that front, some people either really love wolf t-shirt Basim, or they can simply compartmentalise far better than I can. But already knowing where Basim's story will inevitably lead him, and just how ludicrous that actually is a massive turn-off for me, and I can't deny that. There were some cool parts in the story trailer that I'd like to address before we wrap this video up anyway. There was some questioning of the assassin ideology. To what extent that goes beyond the surface level is a different question. I would like if it explores some deep meaning, but we've seen the assassin ideology brought up in marketing for games where it just is an afterthought in the actual story before as well. But again, this questioning is brought up to lead Basim down a path where he embraces his status as the sage of a Norse god for some reason. Something tells me to those who haven't played Valhalla, Mirage may be infinitely more interesting. But I guess my point is, though this is highlighting an assassin as the main protagonist, and it's going to be more assassin focused, it's not completely immune from the absolute lunacy that it's following. Maybe that makes more sense in my head than it does when speaking out loud. But hey, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it will make Basim a million times more compelling. He was quite interesting for brief moments in Valhalla, but that got nullified with utter confusion very quickly. The pros are, from what I've seen of this game, it doesn't make me vomit. It shows surface level Assassin's Creed elements coming together to actually form cohesive gameplay, and maybe that's all players need. Maybe I'm looking too far into this. Well, somebody has to save somebody you like doing it. Does it convince me that Assassin's Creed is going back to form? Not even remotely. but I can register a genuine attempt to try to make an Assassin's Creed game in the shadow of Assassin's Creed Valhalla that was very much so as detached from Assassin's Creed as it gets, barring Odyssey, and I'd go as far as to say that I understand why many people are excited for Assassin's Creed Mirage, but the gameplay demo didn't show me anything groundbreaking outside of teleportation that wasn't present in Assassin's Creed back in 2007 that held any weight. But that was 16 years ago. What passed for groundbreaking back then isn't groundbreaking today. Of course, Assassin's Creed was getting stale before the RPGs came along, and it needed a change desperately. But that doesn't necessarily mean any change. I can't help but feel as if trying to recapture the magic of Assassin's Creed 1 with the more infuriating RPG elements of Odyssey, Origins and Valhalla runs the risk of just not innovating again. I won't knock Assassin's Creed for going back to being actually Assassin's Creed if that's indeed what's happening here, but instead of reverting and trying to recapture the past of Assassin's Creed, either with the older games such as Assassin's Creed 1 through Revelations, 3, 4, Rogue, Unity, Syndicate, even Origins, Odyssey and Valhalla, why not innovate the brand identity in a way that's respectful of it, but also brings something actually refreshing to the table? And that's never going to be doable with pieces scraped off the cutting room floor of an Assassin's Creed Valhalla DLC. I'm sure the developers with that limited resource have indeed done a fantastic job, and I can think of many reasons why me, maybe 3 years ago, would have been excited for a game like this. And I also understand why many are, and I won't pretend I think better, that's nonsense, I just think differently. And that leads us to the big question I want to cap this video off with. Does Assassin's Creed Mirage understand Assassin's Creed? This is not something that I can answer alone. I'm personally not convinced, but I'd love to hear your arguments down in the comments section. If Assassin's Creed is only its brand identity applied to a different story, then sure, maybe it does. But in the older Assassin's Creed games, like Assassin's Creed 1 that this game is supposedly paying homage to, it ran so much deeper than that in its stories, its characters, its themes, its context, and a cutscene followed by a gameplay demonstration of a side mission contract with no context whatsoever doesn't really scream that. But maybe understanding modern Assassin's Creed is all it needs to be. I guess that's for the consumer to decide. And if that's the case, maybe it's me that's the problem. But I've officially rambled for far too long. Those are my thoughts. Thank you for sticking it out if you have managed to this point. Hopefully, I'll see you all very soon. Please take care, and goodbye.